Hello once again. Welcome to another Accreditation TV episode. This time we're going to talk about medical equipment, clinical equipment, particularly loaner and demo equipment, which is kind of a subspecies of clinical equipment, if you will. So we'll get into that. My name is Steve Spobrook. I'm the CEO of MSL Healthcare. If you're watching this live today, be aware that on May 4th, next Wednesday, we are going to do a special event where we're going to talk about what a modern accreditation organization looks like. So I'm really excited to bring that to you. Been working on it really hard for literally a decade now. So can't wait to share that information with you. And as always, you can check it out on our website already. It's there, mslhealthcare.com. And you've probably already been there if you're here. So we welcome you and we welcome our subject matter experts. We've got, of course, Dr. Evan Lofton, who's been on here a lot lately and is our clinical expert. And Tim Adams, who everybody knows Tim's, I start to say infamous, but you're not. One person I would never label as infamous would be Tim Adams. Definitely famous, right up there with Santa Claus, and not just because you look like him, but you've just been around and shared a lot of your knowledge and expertise over the years through American Hospital Association and ASHE and various other organizations. And now we're blessed to have you at MSL. But you're also, your background, you started in clinical engineering, right?
Yeah.
That was your first love.
I'm recovering. Yes.
You're recovering. Well, then you got seduced to the dark side of facility management, which is how I met you way back in, gosh, probably 25 years ago at ASHE. But this is a subject that has always been challenging for people, and I think it probably continues to be. In fact, I know it continues to be. It's especially in this world where people are so portable and interchangeable in terms of staff and whatnot. And that applies really to clinical engineering in general and understanding whether or not equipment is safe for use. But we kind of talked in the green room, if you will, before we started recording a little bit about this, and who's ultimately responsible between your two worlds of making sure a piece of equipment is safe and functional for patient care, and both of y'all kind of feel like you're responsible for that to a certain extent, correct?
And the end result is the organization that is providing care for people is responsible. And
Yeah.
who does actual tasks and work, I won't say it's irrelevant because they need to be qualified and good and all that. But whether it's somebody works for the organization, a third party, however you manage those things, ultimately it is the organization's patients. And like almost everything else we do needs to be a collaborative effort to assure
Yeah.
that we are providing safe technology, effective, folks are trained to use it, and a multitude of other things we'll probably talk about in the next half hour or so.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I completely agree, Tim. The organization has the ultimate responsibility, and I look at it in this role as somewhat of a breakdown in pieces of the puzzle. The puzzle has to be put together the same way every time. And Steve, I'm going to steal an analogy from you. It's a checklist. We've got to make sure that a piece of equipment has been engineering wise checked, make sure the electrical components are working, and then the nurse or the physician and the end user has to make that final decision. And one of the things that we'll talk about probably more a little bit later is, in today's world, as Steve alluded to, we've got a lot of temporary players, and it may be clinical engineering is stepping in, it may be the nurse, it may be a physician, but we also have, and this is not different than ever before, but something we have to be very aware of, is the vendor. And the organization just can't take the vendor's word that it's safe. We take their piece of equipment and we've got to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, that's definitely a issue with loaner and demo beds, but loaner in particular, rental beds, I'd kind of throw them in the same category. But we're talking about ultimate responsibility, and you mentioned checklists, which ties me into aviation. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to get there early today. You know what? But I forgot. Before I get to that, I forgot to tell people if they want to enter questions, please do it in the Q&A, and we will get to those if we can today. If not, we'll get to them later. The other thing that I forgot to mention is if you're one of our Accreditation Readiness Network members and you want CECs, make sure to go over there and get those. Sorry, I almost forgot. Waited till the end. But going back to the aviation analogy, thinking about who's ultimately responsible for accepting an aircraft as safe and ready to fly, it's ultimately the pilot in command, right? Even though, as a former pilot myself, I was a mechanic and I never worked on airplanes, but it was before I took anybody with me, it was my responsibility to make sure that I checked that the people who do that stuff did all of what they were supposed to do, plus did whatever safety inspection, visual, whatever was required. And I think that holds true in the clinical environment, right? It's like it's up to Tim's world to make sure all that stuff on the back end's done, the PMs are done, the testing is done, it is safe and functional. And then when it's up on the unit, it's up to the nurses to identify whether or not all of those things have been complied with. Is this particular piece of equipment, has it been in the queue and been properly maintained and all that stuff? And in this particular category, when we get into loaner and demo equipment, was always kind of, I hate to say it, but it was low hanging fruit from a surveyor's perspective. I mean, I always say, I wasn't really a jerk, but I played one on TV for a while, and all you had to do was go in and ask the question, well, do you have any physicians that come in, bring in their own scopes? Oh, we do. Okay, well, let's find that on the inventory. So, Tim, from your perspective, what would you recommend in 2026 or even before or beyond what people should do to manage that?
I think it first starts with what is your overall equipment management program? How do you handle the things that you own? And what is your standard? That should apply to loaner, demo, rental equipment also. From the patient perspective, it's all the same. No matter
Yeah.
who owns it, to the patient on the patient end of things, it's the same. So start with what is your overall plan? Do you have a check-in program for every piece of medical equipment that comes into your facility or other types of equipment? And um, if so, that should apply to loaner demo also. Um, it's so important to know what you have in the facility from a standpoint of if there would be a recall. And sometimes loaner things are there for one procedure or a week or to get over a little hump of a really high census. But sometimes we have loaner stuff that just kind of becomes ours. Uh,
Yeah.
I I remember how that used to happen. You lease IV pumps and then couldn't find them, so you
Yeah.
you just kept paying for them. But
Yep.
um, how if there's a recall, how do you know what you got? It and you would hope that whoever the owner of that equipment is that you are borrowing, leasing, renting from, that if there's a recall, they're going to immediately contact you. But you have the responsibility to take care of the patients. So
Right.
if you don't know what's there, how are you going to manage a recall situation? So I kind of go back to start with what is your plan, your equipment management plan, whether it's medical equipment or utility management. What is your plan? What do you do with your own stuff? That's the building block of how do you manage loaner and leased. Where it changes is probably when something goes wrong with the equipment. You're probably not going to repair the leased equipment. You're going to contact the the supplier and either get it replaced or they come and service it or you give it back to them or something. But
Yeah.
it seems very inconsistent in terms of quality process that if we own it, we do it this way. If it's loaner or demo, we don't do all the stuff we do if it's ours. We don't check it in, but we do ours. Well, if it's important to check it in, it's important for all of it.
Yeah, I mean, probably, I mean, the whole lease thing, I mean, especially when you talk about major imaging equipment, that's probably a whole nother episode. And we should probably get into that. And we should probably get into recalls as another episode too, because that's another one that really is becoming more and more challenging for people. But from the clinical side of that, Edwin, let's just use this IV pumps because they're so prevalent throughout the building. You know, what do you recommend to your clinical counterparts in terms of how they should go about identifying whether or not a piece of equipment is safe to use?
This falls back into a broken record from me and Steve. You've done it as well. It comes back to the culture of the organization. And Tim's points were extremely good. What is the organization's equipment management plan and who's involved? Clinicians, listen up. You better be involved. It's not just a matter of Tim and clinical engineering facilities to know what's purchased, what's leased, what's loaned, but it's from the clinicians. We've got to have access to that listing as well so that we can be part of the system. And that way, if we identify that IV pump is beeping every 10 seconds and the IV line's clear, we contact our friends in clinical engineering and know this leased piece of equipment is malfunctioning, or here's how to track it. The other thing from a clinician standpoint, and this is from many years ago in my days in the ER, we are the worst for this, is we would have a patient come in a critical status. We would load everything up on them, from a ventilator to IV pumps to other pneumatic devices, send them off to a trauma center with every piece of equipment, and never tell anybody where that equipment went. We've got to own that. I can tell you stories of the number of pieces of equipment that we had to go back and refine and trace and those components. So simply, it is the culture of the organization of owning what you do and focusing on not harming the patient, but then managing the resources. One of the funny things is when once a year finance would do their audit of equipment, they would start asking the questions, and clinical engineering is coming to me and I'm going to them going, we don't know what's going on here. We've got to be part of the plan. This was exacerbated. I guess one of the positives coming out of the pandemic, when equipment was on huge demand. I know that from the organization I worked for at the time, we went from managing and working with about 20 to 25 ventilators to over 100. And we had to know which company, where it came from, when it was due. And it demanded that the clinicians, respiratory therapists, work directly with clinical engineering and facilities to make sure it's safe and effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's, one of the biggest challenges I've seen over the years is how clinical engineering communicates, because it's a passive communication in most cases, right? It's a sticker or it's a tag or, it's something. And, in the old days, and I'm telling on myself a little bit, in the old days, the clinical engineering folks used to try to make those stickers as difficult to interpret as possible, so that it was difficult to find something that was out of, because the old days, surveyors, rather than looking at documentation, they'd walk around, look at devices to see if they were out of PM, right? Ding, there's one, ding, there's another. So, you'd start questioning, well, how do you identify it? Well, if it's got a purple and yellow sticker, that means it was PM'd in September of 2004. It's like, wait a minute. I used to advocate very strongly and still do. It's like, put a sticker on there, say when it was done and when it was due. Because the clinical staff, they've got so much, especially you're talking about ED in a critical environment or ICU, high use environments for this stuff. They don't have the time,
No.
or I want to say the emotional, intellectual bandwidth, and that's in no way a slam on them to
That's
go
real.
purple and yellow. That means September of '04. You need to look and say, oh, it was PM'd in September and it's not due until next September. This piece of equipment is good to use. And that holds true for, loaner equipment and demo equipment. One of the, we talk about one of the more challenging pieces is, these, I guess the rentals really more than loaners, but specialty beds, they're brought in. Oftentimes what happens is they're safety checked from a clinical engineering perspective, at a warehouse somewhere. So they do an electrical safety inspection on it, and they do a, basically, hey, everything goes up and down and does what it's supposed to, and we don't have any leakage current. And then they throw it in the back of a truck and they drive it down the interstate for 200 miles. If you've driven on any of our highways in the last 10 years, you know how smooth they are. And so, then it comes down to, was that inspection, and this is as much for Tim as anybody, or it doesn't matter to me who answers it. That inspection that happened in the warehouse 200 miles away, is that an acceptable inspection at point of use now?
Yeah. I'd go back to when you buy something new, is the fact that somebody in a factory somewhere within the last 6 months, whenever it was built, checked it. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
And most organizations will say, no, it's not. Loaners, demo equipment is no different. Um, what I see from experience standpoint, and this does go back a few years because I got to where I wasn't very involved in clinical engineering as much as the facility and compliance side of things. But a lot of rental stuff would show up in bad shape, you know, stuff missing, broke. Um, it didn't always come in pristine condition. And to some degree, it kind of depended on what it was. So an example from the past, when we rented a balloon pump, they were in very, very good shape. They had been serviced, had been tested. Um, a technician delivered them. They were well cared for, but other things like some of the beds, when they showed up, it's like if when it was in this condition, we wouldn't put it in the patient room. Um,
Yeah.
so you really have to think about what happens, as you said, from how it gets to you from the last time it had a touch by a qualified service person. Um, there's a lot of technologies that um, we probably don't do a complete functional test on. Sometimes, a new technology comes in as a rental or a demo. Demos, used to see this a lot. You know,
Yeah.
company A is going to bring in their latest and greatest, and nobody's ever seen this thing before, but there's a salesperson who's knowledgeable um, with it. How do we know it does what it is supposed to do?
Yeah.
So the functional side becomes very important, and along with that, training. If we're renting something that is a one of a kind, that is different than what we have, even just small differences, maybe our IV pumps have one software uh, version, and the rentals have something different that changes a button or a sequence or something like that. As simple as that. Do we train the staff? And are they prepared to use that? So the training, it's important to be sure that if that is needed, it is done. And when you're renting a bed that's just like the beds you have, or you're renting an IV pump just like the ones you have, staff use them every day. They already know how. But often rental and demo are things that are a little unusual, or maybe it's here for one case or one day
Yeah.
or whatever. Do the folks who will interact with that equipment, do they have the training, or are they trained when the equipment comes in? Just like it would be if we bought it. If we bought it, we probably are going to build into our plan training for that. It should be the same for the rental loaner demo.
So assuming a piece of demo, because the demo is kind of a unique case, right? You're going to have the salesperson who's really trying to make a sale. He's going to bring it in probably through the front door, dressed really nicely, headed up to to the OR to change. Um, the challenge becomes, first of all, what do you do?
Mhm,
Do you do, there needs to be some level of safety inspection. And in this case,
mhm,
the vendor needs to become an advocate for that. And I think to a great extent, we've taught them that they have to do that if they want to keep having the
mhm,
opportunity to sell equipment in our
mhm.
organization. But then this question is, how do you treat that from an inventory standpoint? Because it's
Yeah.
going to be here today and chances are it's going to be gone tomorrow. From a pure accreditation standpoint, right? Demo, loaner, owned, it's all supposed to be inventoried.
I think there's a couple of ways that can be handled, but it is absolutely important that you know it's here today. And a year down the road, it's important to know that it was here a year ago in case an attorney shows up, or there's some kind of litigation that we had no idea it was coming. And we have no knowledge record that we ever had this thing that hurt someone or was involved. And
Yeah.
so, um, whether we put those in our CMMS system, and tag that somehow that it is rented, loaner, demo, so we know it's not ours, but it was here. It has an identifier, and here's the day it left the building. That could be done through the CMMS. It could be done through a spreadsheet that is separate from our CMMS, but then our inventory is the sum of those two things. There isn't a how you do it. It's the fact, do we have record? Do we know what we did with it when it got here? Do we know it was here? And,
Yeah.
and what time frame that happened. And then that record should be permanent, or at least statute of limitations length,
Well,
because things could come up.
and Tim, excellent points, but there is one more place that we have to make sure we know, and that's what person was that piece of equipment used on.
Yeah.
To the balloon pump. We've got to have record that balloon pump BR549 was used on Sally Jones on this date and this time, so that, to your point, a year from now, when the attorney walks in and says this person was injured with this pump, with this IV pump, with this specialty bed, we can go back and track through the CMS record finding that it links everything together. We gotta tie the chain together all the way down the road.
So I was about to ask, and I think you just basically answered, but going back to demo equipment, because the most obvious, well, it could be anything, but let's just assume it's in the OR, because that's where I always seem to run into it, is in the OR. Should you then, or you guys recommending that in the electronic health record for that patient, that demonstration occurred, that it be noted that this piece of equipment, this particular down to the serial number piece of equipment, was used in a demonstration mode? So that brings up a whole nother question, which is not really in the scope of this conversation, but you know what? Executive privilege. Informed consent.
If it is a new technology, and I have faced this directly within the past couple of years, if it is a new technology, and Da Vinci is probably one of the best ones that everybody is getting around, robotics. Yeah. Yes, there is an obligation to provide informed consent for the patient. And that it can be a simple, this proven technology, here's the vendor, here's why, here's in the benefit and risk of the procedure itself can be described what's going on in there. And Steve, let me go back just a second. Also in today's technology, identifying the equipment that's being used on a specific patient has become much easier if you deploy the technology. Most of the pieces of equipment you can scan directly into the patient's electronic record, and have some way of connecting in there, and so that you're not having to write down every little piece. It has become much easier, but again, it goes back to how Tim began. What is your equipment tracking system throughout the hospital when you're tracking it, that it's in your facility, used on this unit, used on this patient, on this date and time? Did you own it, lease it? Was it a new piece or an old piece?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great information. I know we talked a lot about demo already, but the demo thing is particularly challenging just because it's, the time it takes to safety check and bring in a piece of equipment may actually eclipse the time it takes to do the demonstration. So there's just, like, I don't really, if I can get around that, especially if they have confidence, a brand new piece of equipment, it's got to be fine, right, or whatever. So that's, I think from my perspective, well, I like just asking you guys. I mean, what are some of the ways you've seen kind of corral that desire to circumvent, and how do you make sure that the staff, the people that work for the hospital that are going to see this demonstration or be a part of this demonstration, are the gatekeeper that we need them to be?
So real quick story. Again, from many years ago at an organization that Steve, you and I know well. I did a bed replacement program and brought in a brand new bed system, new manufacturer for that organization. It was the best and the brightest of the world. The vendor came in, we did in-services for everybody, documented everything. 6 months down the road, there was a patient fall and injury, and the state got involved. And as the state surveyor and I and our CEO were having a conversation, they said, show me evidence that the CNA and the nurse who were in that shift were educated and demonstrated competency.
Yeah.
And we couldn't. And so we had to recreate that entire system on the spot for everybody. So long lesson learned, in answer to your question, make sure you have clear documentation, not only of education, but of return demonstration, of competency, of understanding in a way that is defendable and supports, for everything else that we've said, safe patient care.
Yeah, I mean, you hate to talk about litigation. It seems like we talk about it a lot, but ultimately, I mean, it happens, and we're in a litigious society. It's getting worse every day. Um, you know, you want to do the right things for patient care, and if you do, chances are the chips are going to fall where they're supposed to. But all you got to do is skip that one last piece, that one piece of evidence that you may need, like Tim said, a year from now. Sometimes it's 2 years from now. It's amazing how long it can take for these things to kind of surface. And so, anything else you guys want to talk about in terms of donor limit or donor, loaner or demo? I just combine those two words into one. I'm just trying to be time efficient here.
Well, you had asked about, kind of how do you corral this? It has to begin with executive leadership, that you don't allow things sneaking in, whether it's, your best surgeon, um, your favorite vendor. You, as an organization, you don't allow it to sneak in. We certainly bring things in, we use them, but we have process, we follow process. And um, it has to start at leadership. What I see happen quite a bit is clinical engineering or facility management has an amazing program. They try their best to account for those things coming in and go through whatever the organization's policy and plan is, um, for incoming equipment. They track it, they have it inventoried somehow, some way they know it's there. But then certain people get to bring certain things in and circumvent that. And if leadership doesn't support, this is how we always do it, it's very hard to stop it, and it puts the organization and patients at risk. That's the bottom line: is you are putting people at risk by doing that. You're putting your own organization at risk by doing that. So begins there with leadership, and then, as you said, culture, that we are consistent in what we do. It doesn't mean that it is the absolute right way or best way, but it's the best way we have determined the know-how, and we always do it that way. Um,
Right. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it gets very political, right?
mhm.
Especially when we're talking about the demo side and even the loaner side. I mean, the one that I used to use all the time was the physician had their own scope that they literally carried from facility to facility. You're talking about rural health, and you got one doc that goes around at 2 or 3 hospitals every week and does, does cases here on Tuesdays and there on Wednesdays. And, um, they traveled with that thing. And, what did you do? Well, the expectation
Oh
was,
yeah.
as they hit the door at 6 in the morning or whatever, someone from clinical engineering would do a safety inspection on the device, and that was all. Finding consistent documentation on those was pretty
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. And then you bring in IC to those scopes, and that's a whole nother subject.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would think in this day and age that is less of an
Yeah.
occurrence because the more of the physicians are working directly for organizations, but I mean it still happens. It's I just don't think it happens at the rate it used to. But regardless,
Yeah.
I mean I think you guys touched on it really well. It's like yes, we get regardless of who owns the device, it the ultimate responsibility belongs with the organization, which starts with clinical engineering doing their piece, which is, somewhat siloed in that they are the experts in how the thing's supposed to work, how it's supposed to be from an electrical safety perspective, from a functional perspective. But then they have to make it so that the clinical side of the house can, with confidence, take that device and use it and know it's going to be safe to use on the patient, right? And really, it all comes down to that. Regardless, I mean, whether we own it, whether they own it, they being a vendor that's trying to sell it to us, or someone that's loaning it to us, or we borrowed it from a hospital adjacent community because we're short, and that happens all the time. Or because it landed on the helicopter with the patient, 2 days ago, and now it's in RED with the wrong sticker on it. I mean, when you were telling that story, Edwin, I was kind of thinking, well, shouldn't the folks, and I won't name the organization because I know where those helicopters were probably going, but they were like, hey, this has got a sticker on it from St. Hypothetical. It doesn't belong to us, But again, ED to ED, they're probably not really going to look at that sort of thing. So,
Right.
anything else you guys want to add before we
No,
kind of wrap?
I think we've covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting topic. It's always going to be a bit of a challenge, I think. But Tim, you touched on the bed and misrepair and would you put it in a patient room? And I got to tell you, it's really easy for me to plug into the patient perspective. It always has been because of my history, but here more recently with what's going on with my spouse and her journey, going to the infusion centers. You get it. Do you think I looked at every one of those pumps and checked the stickers?
Mhm.
And I know the people who maintain that equipment, so I feel really comfortable with them. But I'm like, yeah, that one's good. That one's good.
I,
Of course,
Good.
I have
I
a
can.
little bit different perspective than most patients, but the patients they're going to go, if this bed is a piece of junk, then their perception of the organization starts with that, and you don't want that.
Correct.
I had years ago hired a young man to be a biomedical technician right out of college, and we served a lot of healthcare facilities, and he went to do work at one particular large healthcare facility, um, doing PM and service on IV pumps, and we had a contract to do that. And shortly after that, and he was fairly new, but we had trained him, and he had a degree, college degree in biomed. Um, Shortly after that, his grandmother was in the hospital, and this 8 or 900 bed hospital. When he goes in her room, the infusion pump hooked up to her had his initials on it, and he said,
Whoa.
"Talk about making it real of why we do this." No longer was it just a piece of technology that I'm down in a little dark hole somewhere working on. It's my grandmother.
Yeah.
All of a sudden that changes. So, just think in terms of the loaner and demo equipment. What if it's your loved one, your best friend? Um, at that point, it's like, I don't care who owns it, just do it right.
You
Yeah,
got it.
sure I would
Well
want
said.
the demo equipment on one of my loved ones, but that's a whole nother story for another time. So, well, guys, I really appreciate your time and I appreciate people who tuned in for this one. And whether you're watching it now or going to watch it in the future, again, I just want to remind you, if we didn't get to your questions in the QA, we'll do our best to send you an email response. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. If you're one of our Accreditation Readiness Network members, make sure you jump over there and get CECs. That's going to get a whole lot easier starting May 1st, which is tomorrow. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, make sure you show up on Wednesday the 5th at 2 o'clock for that little video we're excited to share with you. And with that, I'll just say thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you soon.
Have a great day.